Hello and welcome. This is an IMSM webinar on the quality management system, ISO 9001:2015. It's a bit of an overview on the quality management system, just to give you some idea of the benefits that your organization can reap by introducing this management system. And you will see as we go through that in actual fact, it really isn't that much of a burden to implement the system, because in my opinion, if you are a successful business, then you're obviously doing all the right things. And so therefore, if you look at the requirements of the 9001 system, a lot of those requirements are just documenting what you do. And basically, you're providing proof to show everybody outside your organization what a great job you're doing in controlling your processes. So let's just start by giving a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So we'll look at the 9001:2015 quality management system. We'll look at just a brief overview. Then we'll look at the process approach of this particular standard, the plan, do, check, act methodology, risk-based thinking, and the management principles upon which it's based. We'll have a look at the clause structure of the standard, and then we'll have a very brief look at each of the clauses in turn to have a look at what the requirements are in general, and then to just give a sort of an overview and try and untangle the wording to make it easily understandable. And then at the end, we're looking to see how IMSM does fit in. My name is Duncan Mottershead. I'm an independent contractor. I have done work for IMSM as an auditor. And and I am a certificated lead auditor for ISO 9001:2015, as well as for 14001:2015 and 45001:2018. The ISO 9001:2015 is an international standard, and it really just defines the minimum requirements for a company's quality management system. Now, the quality management system comprises of all of the organization's policies, procedures, and other internal requirements that ensure that customer requirements are met with consistency. I think that's a key word, and we'll come across that a little bit later as well. It can be applied to all types and sizes of organizations, and it covers both products and services, and includes processes, which I think is the key part of this for continual improvement of the systems. The ISO 9001 Management System Standard 9001:2015 now adopts a process approach. And whereas previous iterations may have adopted a more procedural approach, this process approach looks at the end-to-end. And a process is just the transformation of inputs into outputs. And if you're a manufacturing company, for example, you may have several items that are put together, so the sub-assemblies, and so you would have a set of inputs, so parts and other items that go into that sub-assembly. You'd have a procedure for putting them together, and then in the end you'd have this completed sub-assembly, and you may have several of those, and those outputs of that particular process become inputs into another process where these sub-assemblies are combined into another assembly, which may or may not be then the final output. So organizations need to manage all of these linked activities. And so what is important, and I think the key piece to understand here is the consistency part. And let me give you just a food analogy that I tend to use. And that is, I make porridge, but you could audit my porridge making. I always use the same equipment. I always put the same amount of ingredients in, so I always put 1 cup of oats and then 5 cups of milk, because that's how I've managed to develop this process. I cook it very slowly on a low heat, and then until it's a particular boiling stuff, and then I serve it. Now, every time I do it, it is the same, right? It's the same consistency. My wife, on the other hand, doesn't adopt that same approach. She then tips the oats into the pan, dips the milk into the pan as much as she feels is necessary, and then cooks it up. And the difference, it's different every single time. Okay. Now, what I'm not saying is my wife is a wonderful cook. She really is. And the nice thing about that is that every time she cooks, it's different. Every time I cook my porridge, it's the same. Now, what I'm trying to lead into here is that if you have an organization, what you need to have at the end of the day when the product leaves your premises is a consistent and predictable outcome. You need to have predictable performance of that part. You need to have a consistency. And so therefore, in looking at this process approach, if you have a fixed way of doing it with a fixed set of clearly defined inputs, then you will get a predictable outcome and predictable output. And that's what is key in this process approach. Now, if you look at this in terms of the plan, do, check, act. So we have our customer requirements, and that is then the planning. So you get all your parts, you plan your items that are going into your assembly, or you plan what you're going to put into the service, and then you need all of your resources in order to do that work. That's within the office, or if you have a manufacturing area, within the manufacturing area, together with all the training and the machinery and equipment. And that is then the doing part, is where you're putting all of those things that you've planned, you put them into action. And then what you do is then afterwards, then you have your performance evaluation. So you check to see that what you have done is and fulfills the requirements that you have given to the customer and that the customer has accepted. So that's then this part of monitoring, and you measure the performance of the parts. You also measure the performance of the business as well overall, in that, am I working to my processes? Because as we previously mentioned, if you have consistent processes and you can have consistent parts that go into those processes, then you're going to have a consistent output, which is the results and the product and services that you provide. But you need to look at both the outcome of what you have and measure the performance of what is leaving your company or your organization to your customers, make sure that it is within limits, and then also then to make sure that, as we said, that you are following your own procedures. And then you have your results. You review the results. Do you need to make any changes? And that then becomes your part of your improvement. And so you always looking to continually improve. As an organization, of course, if you do not continue to improve, your competitors certainly will be. And so therefore, this is an extremely important part of this plan, do, check, act cycle. And so then, having found those items and those wonderful areas of improvement within the organization, you then act on those, and then that then can cause then a planned adjustment to your input, and therefore you go back around the cycle. And all of this then centers around the leadership and commitment of the people within the organization and the leadership team within the organization. So the management principles of the ISO 9001:2015 are customer focus, which is at the top of the list, of course. Leadership. The organization requires leadership from the top to ensure that the quality management system is appropriately driven and that people understand that it's an important part of the operation of the organization. Then you need to have the engagement of people. And of course, then if you have engaged people within your organization, then people are much more able and willing to then share what they think might help the organization grow, improve, which, as I've mentioned, is a very important part of this ISO 9001:2015 standard. And that way, then, you engage with your people, with your suppliers, and with your customers. That is what the 9001:2015 standard says, in order that you can then find out what your customers think of your products. Therefore, then you can put that into your improvement part of the process, and then make the improvements to your products that are going to allow the business to grow. Then, of course, then there's the process approach, which we just looked at, to make sure that you have defined processes in order that you can ensure you know what is going in, how it's being processed, and therefore can predict the outcome. We come then, I know it's down the list, but this continuous improvement is a key part of the 9001:2015 standard. And so, therefore, when you're doing your audits and internal audits, then these are ways that you can look for improvements that can be made to the way that you do business or to the products that you produce. One of the key pieces that the 9001:2015 standard requires that you have evidence of all the good things that you're doing. And so, having gathered all of this data and all of these facts, then it allows you to make better evidence-based decisions, of course, because you've gathered a lot of how the business is working, and therefore having all that information to hand does allow you to make better decisions. And of course, then with all of this information, then you can manage all of the relationships that the business has, both with its key stakeholders, with any compliance requirement, compliance organizations, and with customers, but then of course, especially with your employees and your staff. ISO 9001:2015 has adopted the ISO high-level structure. That structure is called Annex SL. And you will see that many of the later standards follow this exact same structure. ISO 14001, the environmental standard, 45001, the occupational health and safety standard, they follow this same structure as well as a lot of the other standards. And what it has done is each of these has 10 clauses. Clause 1 defines the scope of that particular standard. Clause 2 has normative references for that standard. Clause 3 has terms and definitions of the particular standard. And then from clause 4 onwards, then this becomes the really the main part of the standard and the requirements. So clause 4 is then the context of the organization. Clause 5 is about leadership. Clause 6 is planning. Clause 7 is about support. Clause 8 is about the operation as a whole. Clause 9 is performance evaluation. And clause 10 is about improvement. So let's have a little look at these main clauses, clause 4 to clause 10, in a little bit more detail and try and understand a little bit more of what the ISO 9001:2015 Quality Management System Standard is trying to get the organization to implement. So, clause 4 is about the context of the organization. This is about determining the positive and negative effects upon the organization, and this is basically it's a pestle. And so once you have done this and you've listed all the positive and negative factors that may affect the organization, you look at the elements of competitors, about suppliers, and the normal risks associated within those. So competitors may, you look at the risk of competitors maybe taking your qualified people from you, or the suppliers, maybe supply chain issues, and those things. So you're looking at all of the risks associated with those, looking at compliance requirements and so on. Then you need to understand the needs and expectations for your interested parties. And again, this is just thinking about what are the requirements of my customers, what are the requirements of the people who work within the organization, what are the requirements put upon the organization by the external compliance organizations. And then you look at the scope of the management system. It might just be a particular site, or it might be multiple sites. It just depends on how much or what areas you like the ISO 9001:2015 standard to cover. So for clause 4, the key documents, and it's not an all-inclusive list, but it's just the main ones, is you need to have a document which shows that you have looked at and thought about what the internal and external issues are, so you've done a pestle analysis, and that you've thought about the needs and expectations of interested parties and listed them, and then you've defined the scope of your quality management system. Clause 5 then takes a look at leadership, and then it looks at how you would demonstrate your leadership and commitment. You have to show that you've determined and understood your customer, your statutory and regulatory requirements, that you've thought about and taken time to stand back and think about the risks and opportunities facing the organization. And one of those would be, if you think about the current pandemic, who 2 years ago would have the risk of a pandemic within their risks and opportunities register? All of these risks and opportunities, they do come out of the blue. So to think and try and think about what may occur and think about possible ways that you might mitigate those occurrences are quite key to organizations. Then you need to establish your quality policy. You need to assign your roles and responsibilities. So basically, those last two define the key documents that the standard is looking for, and that is quality policy, and then basically an organization chart. Generally, a structural organization chart should be enough. In fact, it's probably the best way to do it, because you can see that the reporting, the way that the reporting is done within the organization, without having to update it every time somebody moves within the organization, if it has names in it. Clause 6 is about planning, and this is where you look at the risks and opportunities that you've done from your SWOT analysis, and then think about the actions that you would take in order to address these risks and opportunities. You then define some quality objectives and what you're going to, and how you'll plan to achieve those quality objectives. And those quality objectives, of course, need to be SMART. So you need to define the objective, you need to define who is going to do it, you need to define how the results are going to be measured, and then how long you're going to give in order to have those objectives achieved. Measuring those objectives is key, of course, because how otherwise can you know whether you're getting close to them, or whether you're achieving them or not. Clause 7 is then about support. And support is about providing the infrastructure and the environment and the resources necessary for the organization. And it's about thinking about competency and the training requirements. And training could be external courses where you get a certificate, or it could be an internal course, it could be an on-the-job training course, just something that is documented. So if somebody has a toolbox talk, then get a toolbox talk sign-up sheet and document the fact that that training and competency has been provided. Or if you have someone who is having an on-the-job training of maybe a new piece of equipment that the company has acquired, then just an email to say that the person has acquired this competency by on-the-job training is enough. But you need to have some kind of document to say that that thing has been done. You need to make sure that you build awareness of the quality management system throughout the organization. And you need to ensure that any documented information required by the standard is collected and controlled. So what you need to do is to make sure that people understand the importance of the quality management system, because for some orders that the organization will be taking on, the quality management system is a requirement, and therefore you need to ensure that you are following the requirements of that quality management system. Within this clause 7, also then comes a calibration requirement. And so therefore, if you have pieces of equipment that require calibration, you need to make sure that you note those and that you keep records. Within this clause 7 support, you need to make sure that you have your training requirements documented, and that training records are kept, and that you think about then the training that you would be providing to your staff, and then note that down. Then, of course, you need to think about what you're going to do to safeguard the documents and the records that you have within your organization in your IT systems. Because we've all heard about the breaking into IT systems that seems to happen with quite regularly nowadays. And so therefore you need to be assured that should some issues arise with somebody breaking into your servers, that you are able to quickly recover. So this then says you should, this is inferring that you should really make sure that you have regular backups so that you can quickly recover your IT systems in the event of somebody breaking into the IT systems. Clause 8 is the operations side, and this is the large portion of the ISO 9001:2015 standard. Within this, it looks at the whole process from the order right through to delivering the final product or service to the customer. And within that, if you have a design and development process, it also requires that you fully document the design and development process. Also, if you use external subcontractors, then you need to ensure that you control those and that they do as they perform their functions in accordance with your organization's requirements. Also, that externally provided products and services that also is the suppliers that you use also need to review the performance of your suppliers on a regular basis and make sure that they are providing products and services with the appropriate quality levels. The traceability and fully documenting the design and development process, these are quite obvious things. It's a lot of the ISO 9001:2015 standard is just common sense, isn't it? If you think about, being able to trace a product through from start to finish, from order to shipment, then being able to determine how it was made, what parts comprise it, and so on, it seems quite obvious to me to ensure quality. And if something does unfortunately go wrong at the customer side, then you are able to trace right through your whole manufacturing process to see where that may have had an issue, and then make sure that there aren't any others that are impacted by the same issue. Fully documenting the design and development process is another obvious thing, and all that requires you to do is to make sure that you have appropriately checked the designs at various times throughout the design and development process, and that they suitably competent and a person with the suitable competence and authority within the organization has reviewed the design as it has progressed through the development process, and that's from the start through to the finished product, and make sure that all of the compliance requirements are met and that you have the appropriate certifications that that product or service may require. So some of the key documents for this would be, of course, then the design development process, if you have one, that you show that you have appropriate supplier and subcontractor management, and then also that you have an approved supplier list. Again, these are just the key documents. They are not the all-encompassing number of documents that you require. Clause 9 is all about the performance evaluation. And this then is, you would have within the organization certain KPIs, and one of the key KPIs that standard asks for is to ensure that you understand what the customer perceptions are. And so therefore you need to ensure that you are able to get your customers' feedback. You need to establish and plan and implement and maintain an internal audit program, and you must have a management review. The standard says top management must review the QMS at planned intervals. Although it doesn't say what those planned intervals are, generally, when you're looking at commitment and there's a requirement for commitment within the standard, then it would seem that a management review of at least an annual basis would show that minimum requirement for commitment that the standard requires from an organization. And so again, within that clause, the key documents would be then you need to have an internal audit program, you need to have your internal audit reports, and then of course your management review meeting minutes. Clause 10 is improvement. Now, clause 9, with its internal audit requirement, then I believe, and it's in my opinion, that internal audit gives an ideal opportunity for people within the organization to provide ideas for improvement, because those people within the organization doing those particular jobs would be ideal in the ideal position to think about those things which might improve what they do. And so therefore, internal audits are a great opportunity for improvement. Within the ISO 9001:2015 standard, clause 10 says that you need to select opportunities for improvement. So your internal audits would have these opportunities, as well as any other opportunities that the company sees, maybe to improve its machinery, or improve its IT equipment, or its IT infrastructure, or all of these things. They just look at ways to improve what you do and how you do it, and to control and manage any non-conformity. So if you find your non-conformities, and although one assumes that that a company doesn't obviously go out and try to have non-conformities, most have the occasional non-conformity, and therefore you need to make sure that you have a process in place that is appropriate to manage and control any non-conformities, and to make sure that you appropriately do determine what caused the non-conformity, and then put into place procedures which will ensure that those non-conformities do not reoccur in the future. And so therefore, the key documents associated with this clause would be, you need to make sure that you see your improvement opportunities and that you document those, and then you have a non-conformance register, and then any items that you have found, or any instances of non-conformances, they would need to have a root cause analysis and the corrective actions appropriately documented within that register. So where would IMSM fit in? Well, what IMSM do is they work with you, and they have worked with over 12,000 organizations globally, and they have a practiced approach to implementing management systems within organizations of many different sizes. And what they do is they support you along your journey to implement the standard. In this particular case, it's 9001:2015, but they will provide support in other standards as well. And the way it works is that they have an initial consultation with you, and they'll perform a gap analysis, and there'll be someone like an independent assessor, such as myself, would come in and discuss with you what systems you have in place, and then review with you those systems and highlight any areas that might need attention. Then we look at the requirements of the standard and the documentation requirements of the standard, and advise on what documents you need to make sure that you produce and maintain on a regular basis. And then for the 9000 particular standard that you're looking at, then IMSM provide manuals for your organization based on a template that they have, and their information that has been gleaned through the gap analysis, and also then with subsequent conversations of anything that may come up while the assessor is taking the information that you've provided and then putting it into the templates to produce your manuals for your management system. They would look at the implementation, and also then they have a certification body that comes in and will certify your organization and certify your management system to ISO 9001:2015. And that audit then takes place after the manuals have been produced, they have been provided to you as an organization, and that you have worked with them for a period of time, to ensure that everything is fine and that everybody's happy, and that certain, maybe some internal audits have been performed already, and therefore the auditor will come in, an independent auditor will come in and then review your management system, and then should it comply with the requirements of ISO 9001:2015, then you will be provided with the certification. So that is the end of the presentation. I hope it's been informative for you. I hope that it's explained some of the things that you may have been thinking about, and that it's in my view, it has given you an opportunity to think that actually it's not that big of a step for the organization, for your organization, to implement ISO 9001. I think that the benefits of the ISO 9 are implementing the ISO 9001 2015 standard against the effort that might be required is that the benefits well outweigh that small amount of effort that will be required, and with the help of ISO 9, with the help of IMSM, I'm sure that you will be able to implement the ISO 9001 2015 standard more easily than you think. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.